There's actually no coming back from this. And that's what people don't really appreciate about this war. This war is not just directed at Israel. This war is not directed just at the GCC and the illusion of American empire. This war is directed at American empire itself. And what people don't appreciate is the eschatological aspects of this war, in that Iran sees it sees a moral duty, a moral imperative from God to destroy the great Satan, which is the American empire.
Piers Morgan invited a man who correctly predicted Trump winning and the Iran war, then spent the interview trying to make him look insane. I grew up watching my grandmother clock this move from across the living room. They never let the ones who are right finish talking. She said it so casually, like it was just the way things worked. I was 19, and I didn't fully get it. I get it now. Professor Jiang Xueqin walked into that interview with a prediction record that most analysts would trade careers for, 2 for 2. And the moment his third prediction, that America loses this war, started gaining traction in that conversation, Piers leaned back, called it baloney, and shut it down. Clean, practiced, invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. I'm Silas Miller, and if you've been watching this war unfold and feeling like the mainstream commentary doesn't add up, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe, and let's get into it.
Professor Jiang joins me now. Professor Jiang, thank you very much indeed for joining me on Uncensored.
Hi, Piers.
Let me start with these three big predictions, because you've been proven obviously completely right about two of them, and the third one is now unfurling before our eyes. Are you confident that you'll be proven right with the third prediction, that Iran ultimately will prevail in this war?
Right. So right now, the United States and Iran are fighting a war of attrition. The United States is trying to degrade Iran's military capacity, and Iran is trying to strangle the world economy. And it turns out that Iran is putting a lot of pressure on the GCC. And I think at the end of the day, the United States will be compelled to send ground forces. Once the United States sends in ground forces, there's no turning back. It's all in. The sunk cost fallacy kicks in. It'll be another Vietnam for the United States, because Iran is a mountain fortress. And the United States right now doesn't have the manpower, the manufacturing capacity, and the political will to fight a long war of attrition on the ground in Iran.
Right, so I think because of what you've said at the end there, it's highly unlikely that Trump would commit ground forces, because he's always pledged not to, and I think he would see the inherent danger of that. So if he doesn't commit ground forces, how do you see this war playing out?
Well, right now, if Trump doesn't commit ground troops, he does have a variety of options. The first option is just to simply declare victory and call it a day. Unfortunately, the problem with that is that U.S. bases are still exposed, the GCC economies are still under pressure, the Strait of Hormuz is still closed, and there are no signs that Iran is interested in peace negotiations. Iran feels as though it has the upper hand because it has the political will and the resources to draw this war out. Now, let's assume that Trump does withdraw from the Middle East. Then what happens is that the GCC nations of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, UAE now are forced to pay a ransom to Iran, because they supply the world with their oil through the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. But in return, they get food. So the GCC nations import anywhere from 80 to 90% of their food from overseas. And so basically, the center of gravity shifts from the petrodollar to whatever financial system that Iran wants to focus on. And it could be BRICS, it could be gold, it could be anything. But remember, the problem with that is that the U.S. economy is a Ponzi scheme. It's dependent on the GCC investing in AI and tech stocks, in startups like Uber in order to finance the U.S. economy. If this financing stopped, then the U.S. economy could face collapse. And this means that these young men could not afford their OnlyFans anymore, and this could lead to a revolution in the streets. So the consequences for America would be dire if America were to retreat from the Middle East.
I mean, it seems that the key part of all this sort of economic strangulation, if you like, by Iran is the Strait of Hormuz. We've already seen in the last few hours today that the successor to Ayatollah Khamenei, his son, has come out. Apparently, we haven't seen him or heard from him directly, but there's a statement in which he talks about keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed indefinitely. If that was to happen, what would be the consequences for the global economy, and how soon would we see those consequences?
Well, I mean, the consequences would be dire because cheap energy, cheap petroleum products are the very basis of the global modern economy. So it just wouldn't be jet fuel that would be affected. It would also be food because remember, food is produced by fertilizer, which comes from the GCC as well as sulfuric acid, which helps the process of some semiconductor production. So artificial intelligence, food production, global travel are all dependent on products from the GCC. It's only been 2 weeks that the Strait of Hormuz has been closed for almost 2 weeks now, and already we're seeing high oil prices surpassing $100 a barrel. Iran says that they want to move it to $200 a barrel, which signals that they want the Strait of Hormuz closed for months. Now, remember, even if Iran were to open up the Strait of Hormuz, it would take weeks before oil production continues. So I think for the global economy, I think we've reached the point of no return. And in the future, global economies have to commit to a bit of deindustrialization and even mercantilism in order to survive future shocks. So if you go to Southeast Asia, Vietnam and Thailand have already ordered the government workers to work from home in order to save fuel.
You've pointed out that the Gulf Cooperation Council monarchies, the GCC, as you've alluded to several times here, are structurally unusual states because they're propped up by oil, desalination. They don't have their own water supply naturally, and American protection. You say correctly, they were built in open desert with no food security, as you said, 80% imported, no water security, the desalination dependency, no geographic defenses, they're flat, exposed terrain, no demographic cohesion. In places like Dubai, for example, 90% of the population are expats, and no independent security architecture reliant on the US, who have bases obviously in many of the states there. If you put all this together, is what's happening now in terms of the tactics that Iran are deploying, including the threats to desalination, but also targeting, obviously, targeted hotels and airports and so on, going to the heart of what the states there would like to see as the future of their economy, which is tourism, sport, entertainment, clearly designed to scare people away from that. Is this now representing an existential threat, do you think, to the business model of the GCC states going forward?
Right. So the most vulnerable city and often the most glamorous city in the GCC is Dubai. And for many years, Dubai has been very successful in cultivating an image as the new city of London, as the new Hong Kong of the Middle East. And thousands of these millionaires flock to Dubai for the glamorous lifestyle as well as the tax-free aspect of the city. But the reality is that this was all premised on global peace, on Pax Americana, on the capacity of America to project power all around the world and provide security guarantees to the GCC. Now this aura of inevitability and invincibility of American empire has been shattered. And once an illusion is shattered, there's actually no coming back from this. And that's what people don't really appreciate about this war. This war is not just directed at Israel. This war is not directed just at the GCC and the illusion of American empire. This war is directed at American empire itself. And what people don't appreciate is the eschatological aspects of this war, in that Iran sees it sees a moral duty, a moral imperative from God to destroy the great Satan, which is the American empire. And the base of the American empire, of course, is the global economy.
Right. At the heart and the head of the American economy is the President of the United States. You've argued that Trump is not the most powerful person in America, and you've inferred that actually the real power base is Israel. Explain that.
Right. So I actually don't say the real power base is Israel. What I say is that the real power base are a collection of secret societies that have an eschatological view of this war. And these secret societies include the Freemasons, which are now called the Rosicrucians and the Knights Templars. They include Jewish organizations called the Sephardim Frankists, who are embedded in religious movements called Shabbat Lubavitch. And then you have the Jesuits. You have a collection of secret societies. And they believe that a war in the Middle East would start a process that would culminate in the end times and the return of Jesus, the arrival of the Jewish Messiah, the building of a one world government. They have different eschatologies, but a lot of their time frames do align. So where they converge is that there has to be a war in the Middle East to kick things off. This war in the Middle East will lead to the defeat of the American empire, and this will lead to the culmination of the Greater Israel Project, where Israel is able to control the Middle East from the Nile to the Euphrates. Once the Greater Israel Project is in place, it will transform into the Pax Judaica, which is an AI surveillance state. This will eventually lead to the war of Gog and Magog, the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the building of the Third Temple, the return of the Jewish diaspora to Jerusalem, and the arrival of the Jewish Messiah or the Antichrist. So they have the scripted out. And unfortunately, a lot of world events are conforming to this script.
Right. I mean, a lot of people say a lot of what you've just said is a load of fantastical baloney and driven by anti-Semitic tropes. What do you say to that?
Look, I completely sympathize with this argument. 5 years ago, I would have said the same thing about this sort of argument and thinking. So what I do is predictive modeling, okay? Meaning that I'm going to throw some theories out there. And then based on these theories, I'm going to extrapolate into the future and see what the predictions are. If these predictions are correct, then my theories ought to have some legitimacy. Now, when I teach, I don't engage in historical analysis. I engage in speculative analysis. And so in 2024, 2 years ago, I did say that this war in Iran would happen, and I provided a lot of my analysis. And a part of my analysis that's very important is the eschatological analysis, meaning that Christian Zionists control the United States. There's a preacher called John Hagee who runs an organization called Christians United for Israel, which has about 7 million members. Christian Zionists are heavily embedded in the national security apparatus and in the Pentagon. There's reporting that U.S. commanders have told their troops that this is a war to bring back Jesus and to be not afraid. So that's my argument. Like, I don't want to believe this, but because this war in Iran is happening, I'm forced to conclude that some of my speculative analysis has validity. Otherwise,
I think to be honest, I think the word speculation doesn't quite do it justice. I mean, look, there's no doubt your predictions so far have been proven to be uncannily accurate in relation to Trump winning and then going to war with Iran. But I think the idea that this is all part of a plot to bring back Jesus Christ, look, there might be some people out there that carry such a phrase. I think it's highly unlikely, unless any evidence emerges to the contrary, that they are current commanders in the United States military. But Professor Jiang, you have a big following. Lots of people are interested in your predictive analysis. It's good to have you on Uncensored. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Piers.
Let's establish something before we go any further, because the internet has been so focused on Piers Morgan's dismissal that the actual substance of what Professor Jiang said is getting lost in the noise. And that might be exactly what was intended. Professor Jiang went 2 for 2 on predictions that most credentialed analysts got completely wrong. Not slightly wrong, completely wrong. The same people who were on television in 2024 telling you Trump had no path to the presidency and that military action against Iran was geopolitical fantasy. Those people still have their platforms, still have their credentials, still get booked for the Sunday shows. Meanwhile, the man who called both of those things accurately gets invited onto Piers Morgan's show and handed a shovel to dig his own credibility grave the moment the conversation moves somewhere uncomfortable. I need you to sit with that inversion for a second, because it tells you something important about what mainstream media platforms are actually selecting for. And it is not accuracy. Now, let's talk about what Jiang actually argued. Because the dismissal worked so smoothly that most of the coverage skipped straight to the secret societies and never came back to the geopolitical analysis, which is genuinely serious and which nobody in that studio challenged with a single fact. The war of attrition argument is not fringe, it is the argument. Jiang laid it out cleanly. The United States is trying to degrade Iran's military capacity through air power. Iran is simultaneously strangling the global economy through the Strait of Hormuz, and the question of who can sustain that exchange longer is not a close call when you examine the actual variables. America needs a clean, decisive, politically digestible victory, and it needed it fast. Because the longer this drags out, the more the sunk cost fallacy pulls decision-makers toward escalation. And escalation in this context means ground forces. And ground forces in Iran, a mountainous country of 85 million people with decades of asymmetric warfare doctrine, is a catastrophe that even the most hawkish strategists in Washington are quietly terrified of. Jiang called it another Vietnam. That is not hyperbole. That is the assessment that keeps generals up at night and never makes it onto the evening news. And Piers Morgan's response to this layered, specific, historically grounded analysis. I think Trump would see the inherent danger of that. That's it. That's the pushback. A vibe, a feeling about what Trump would probably do. No data, no strategic counter-argument, no engagement with the actual mechanics Jiang laid out. Just a gentle redirect dressed up as a rebuttal. Let's talk about the GCC, because this is the part of Jiang's analysis that should be front-page news and isn't. The Gulf Cooperation Council states Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain are structurally some of the most fragile nations on the planet when you strip away the oil money and the American security umbrella. No natural water supply, 80 to 90% food imported. Flat, exposed terrain with no geographic defenses. In places like Dubai, 90% of the population are expats with no deep cultural or political investment in the state's survival. And the entire economic model, the tourism, the finance, the Formula One races, the luxury real estate, is built on the premise of Pax Americana. On the assumption that American power projection makes the region safe enough for global capital to park itself there comfortably. That assumption is now visibly cracking. Iran has been targeting the infrastructure of that illusion deliberately and methodically. Hotels, airports, desalination facilities. These are not random military targets. They are the nervous system of the GCC's economic future. And once the illusion of invincibility shatters, once the image of Dubai as the safe, glamorous playground of global wealth gets replaced by footage of missile strikes and evacuated terminals, there is no marketing budget big enough to rebuild it. Jiang said it directly. Once an illusion is shattered, there is no coming back. And he is right. I think about the working Americans whose pension funds are tangled up in the tech stocks and Gulf investments propping up this entire arrangement. People who have no idea that their retirement security is downstream of whether Dubai can keep its airport open. That connection never gets made on television. It got made in this interview. And then Piers changed the subject. Now, the eschatology section. Let's be precise here because this is where Jiang lost the room, and it deserves an honest assessment. The secret society's framework, the Freemasons, the Frankists, the Jesuits, the end times convergence theory. That is where serious analysts are going to check out. And I understand why. When you move from game theory and structural analysis into claims about scripted eschatological agendas driving global military decisions, you're asking your audience to make a significant leap without the kind of evidentiary foundation that the rest of your analysis rests on. I am not going to pretend that framework doesn't create real problems for Jiang's credibility with serious audiences. It does. But here is what Piers Morgan did that was intellectually dishonest. And this is the part that nobody is talking about. He waited. He let Jiang get through the entire eschatology section without interruption. He let it all land. And then he packaged the entire interview, the game theory, the GCC structural analysis, the Strait of Hormuz economics, the ground forces prediction. He packaged all of it together with the secret society's framework and dismissed the whole thing as fantastical baloney. That is not journalism. That is a rhetorical move. You take the most speculative element, attach it to everything else, and torpedo the entire body of work in one sentence. It is the oldest trick in the discrediting playbook, and Piers Morgan executed it with the kind of practiced smoothness that only comes from years of doing it on television. And here is what makes it worse. Jiang himself was transparent about the speculative nature of that framework. He said explicitly, "I don't want to believe this." He said, "I engage in speculative analysis, and I test it against predictions." He was not presenting eschatology as established fact. He was presenting it as a theoretical model that he tests against real-world outcomes. That is actually a defensible intellectual position. Piers Morgan either did not understand that distinction or understood it perfectly and ignored it because it was more useful to him to play the clip of secret societies and end times than to engage with the parts of Jiang's analysis that he had no answer for. And that brings us to the real question this interview raises, which is the one Piers Morgan definitely did not want to end up on. Why invite someone with Jiang's prediction record onto your platform if your plan is to dismiss him? There are two answers, and neither of them reflect well on Piers Morgan or the media infrastructure he represents. Option 1. Piers booked Jiang because his track record generates clicks and attention, fully intending to use the interview to neutralize him before his audience got too invested in the third prediction. You get the credibility boost of having the guy on. You get the viral moment of the dismissal. And you protect the narrative that America is not losing this war, which happens to align perfectly with the MAGA media ecosystem that Piers has been carefully cultivating his brand inside of for the past several years. Option 2. Piers genuinely did not do enough homework to engage with Jiang's structural arguments, defaulted to the eschatology section as an easy out, and the dismissal was less calculated conspiracy and more the reflexive self-protection of someone who realized mid-interview that he was out of his depth. Honestly, I think it is both. I think Piers Morgan is smart enough to know that a man predicting American defeat in Iran is bad for the brand he has built around being adjacent to Trump's orbit. And I think he is also the kind of television personality who confuses performing skepticism with actually exercising it. The smirk is not analysis. The raised eyebrow is not a rebuttal. And a lot of people would call this baloney is not a fact. It is a temperature check on what the room will accept. That is not journalism. That is audience management. The working people watching that interview deserved better. They deserved someone who would push back on Jiang's structural arguments with actual counter-evidence, if the counter-evidence exists. They deserved someone who would engage seriously with the Strait of Hormuz economics, the GCC vulnerability analysis, the ground forces calculus, and either confirm it or dismantle it with facts. Instead, they got a smirk and a pivot. And then Piers thanked him for coming on and moved to the next segment. My grandmother would have recognized it immediately. They never let the ones who are right finish talking. Not because they can prove them wrong, because they can't. That is the mandate. We finish the conversation they cut short. If that matters to you, share this video, hit subscribe, and bring someone else into this conversation who needs to hear it. I'm Silas Miller. The mandate holds.